Hello and welcome to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. As the title to this video implies, we're going to be taking a look at lower budget second focal plane 1:6 LPVOs. I originally wanted this video to stay underneath $500, but unfortunately, two of the optics we're going to be taking a look at in this video start around the $600 to $630 price point. So we're going to have those to as low as the low 300s on regular price. And while we're over here, I'm going to, instead of talking about all of these scopes individually with all their specs and whatnot, I'm going to leave a lot of font on the screen right now so this way you guys could read all the specs for all of these different optics. But we're going to be starting with the least expensive normally, which is the Vector Continental. This is around $320 normally. Next is going to be the SIG Tango MSR. It's around $320 with the mount, which is actually on my Venom, but we'll talk about that soon. Next up is the Burris RT6, which comes in around $370, again with a pepper mount, which is not the best, but it's still something. Followed closely by the Tomahawk 2 from Swamp Fox. This comes in at $389 or so right now. Then the Primary Arms Special Purpose Nova. This is technically a GLX in sheep's clothing, but they didn't want to call it a GLX for, I don't know why. These were around $400 normally. I don't know if these are going to be available anymore, but we'll touch on that soon. Next up is the Vortex Venom. That comes in around $450 normally, followed right by with the Vortex PST Gen 2, $600 normally. The Night Pearl 1:6 manual is, again, the most expensive one here. It's around $631 on their website. Now, if we were to factor in what these typically can be found for on sale, this is going to be changed up a little bit, but I'm not going to go ahead and go crazy with swapping everything over, but I'm just going to run down the numbers real quick. You could find these for as low as $250, depending on the reticle. The SIG you could find for as low as $280 right now. The RT6 is actually around $320. I forgot to mention the Primary Arms SLX Nova would slot itself in between the MSR and the RT6 at around $350-ish. The Tomahawk 2, you can get it in a different reticle, which isn't going to be as nice as this, for around $360. The Primary Arms Special Purpose, I actually paid $200 for it used. I don't know if these are going to be available new anymore, which is actually very upsetting, as you'll probably agree with by the end of this video. But in the open used market, low 200s, which really puts it at the cheapest. The Vortex Venom could be found for around $300. So it goes from all the way up here to almost the cheapest of the entire lineup. That's pretty impressive. The PST is still going to be pretty high, or usually you could find these for around $500, sometimes with a mount for that price. I have seen them personally go as low as the low to mid 400s without a mount within the last year or so, which is really a stellar deal. And the manual M6 from Night Pearl is still brand new to market, so those I haven't seen for anything other than their $631 price point. Now, there are a lot of other options in this sort of price point and magnification range setup, but I'm not going to have the option for including all of them. I will include some footage from some scopes that do fit in this market, but I'm not going to go crazy and talk about every single scope that's currently available. Instead, what I want to do is see if there's a real difference between the price points that are on the table here, $630 to as low as $300 basically, and talk about if there's any differences, and if so, what they are. Talking very briefly about the overall controls while we look at the elevation turrets, I'm going to talk about these optics from least desirable to most desirable. We are going to start this off with the Burris RT6. It is one of the older options here. It is one of 3 that is made in the Philippines, and even though it still holds its own in a couple of other areas that we will be taking a look at momentarily, overall it feels a little outdated in a couple of areas. The controls aren't really that great to manipulate, and when you do manipulate them, they're okay. More than capable and suitable for 5 years ago, but against today's modern rivals, it lacks a little bit of polish. The SIG Tango MSR is next.
Without a shadow or question of doubt, it has the worst elevation turret. However, the only thing that really brings it back from being the absolute worst is that the illumination and the magnification ring are both pretty good. Now, the illumination ring does not have offs in between each position, which is a big negative for a lot of people, so keep that in mind. But the magnification ring itself feels very nice. It has great knurling and a nice little cattail to make using it a lot easier. Next up is the Tomahawk 2 from Swamp Fox. This is the only scope that we're going to be looking at today that has an exposed elevation turret. Thankfully, they chose to make it a locking one, but despite that, it still doesn't really feel all that great. And even though a lot of the controls on this are laid out fairly smartly, it still feels fairly cheap overall. The lock on the elevation turret is good enough, but the turret itself just doesn't fill you full of confidence. And to be brutally honest, in a second focal plane 1-6, I really don't see the appeal. But if you do, kudos to you and more power to you. All the other controls are good enough. Coming in at middle of the pack is the Vortex Viper PST Gen 2. This is a very old and beat up scope, but it still works really well. The reason why it's in the middle and not any higher is because it's starting to show its age in a couple of areas. The elevation turret, for example, is extremely challenging to turn, very tight, and you can see on top it doesn't really have a good sharp edge to grab. It's really awkward to use. The magnification ring on this also doesn't have a throw lever, usually that's included, but with one, it's perfectly fine. But without it, it really is lackluster. As far as the illumination control, it does have offs in between, and it does have a nice recessed cap on the outside, but this particular one, being as old and abused as it is, has developed a lot of play in it. Overall, it's still a workhorse of an optic. Up from there is the PST's little brother, the Venom. This has a much nicer elevation turret as opposed to the PST, and I like the magnification ring a little bit more, especially with the magnification number being presented to you on the backside. The illumination control on this only has 6 brightness settings as opposed to the PST's, I believe, 12, and the clicks just feel a lot nicer to get into position. All of the controls on this have really been thought out and well antiquated into the overall system, and I have to say I quite like it. The Vector Continental is about as simple as you can get, and that's a good thing in some cases. The controls on every Vector Continental that I have reviewed recently have been very good to almost perfect. This capped version is great when it comes to its overall turret design. They do offer these in exposed locking, but again, for a 1-6 or even a 1-8, I don't see the real appeal. All of the touch points on this have this wonderful bull nose and milled spline groove to it, and they feel fantastic. The only thing, again, that it's missing is some sort of included cattail or throw lever. I had a hard time figuring out which one was going to be the top, but it's between this and the next one. This special purpose GLX, as I will call it, is a baby version of a PLXC for a much lower price point. The last of the 3 Filipino-made scopes that we're going to be looking at today has a lot of the same great features that we've known to love with the SLX, GLX, and PLX lineup from Primary Arms recently, and it comes together in a really, really awesome little package. There's not a lot I could say about this negatively, and if you ever held one in hand and used it, you'd understand what I'm talking about. Coming in at the most expensive is the Night Pearl Manual M6. This has incredible feeling controls. It definitely feels more on the premium side of things, and it's a good thing, but the price definitely reflects that. I think there is a happy medium between all the other optics that we've looked at. This, though, definitely has the nicest detents of all of the controls that we've looked at, and some of the nicest feeling components. Like the magnification ring, when you turn this, just it feels really solid, but yet really easy and buttery. It's awesome. Very, very nicely made scopes. Reticles are a very personal choice, but how I'm going to be sorting these out is by illumination brightness and overall usability. And we're going to be starting off with the Burris RT6. This reticle is outdated. It is the smallest, the hardest to use, and it has the dimmest illumination. Nothing about this screams, wow, this is awesome. It could be very easily updated and brought into the 21st century where it would be extremely competitive, but I don't expect Burris to do that anytime soon. Next up is the SIG Tango MSR. A step up from the RT6 as far as illumination goes, and as far as being able to actually see inside the circle in the middle, it's better, vastly better. The posts at 3, 6, and 9 help draw your eye to the center, and the BDC on the bottom might not be everyone's cup of tea, but at least it's mostly sort of labeled in a way that you can understand it and use it. The illumination on this is definitely better than the RT6, but it still lacks a lot of the overall brightness of the best of the bunch. The Venom is like the MSR, but a little bit more involved. The posts at 3, 6, and 9 are skinnier but longer, the illumination's a touch brighter, and the reticle, I'd have to say, might be a little bit more usable. It just seems a lot easier to pick up and understand what they were trying to accomplish with it, and that is why it is above the MSR. If you are not a fan of this style of reticle, don't worry, there are plenty of other options out there, which we are going to be looking at right now. The manual M6 is when we start going into a simpler looking reticle, but it still offers very poor illumination. This is not a fiber dot. They cannot do a fiber dot unless you have a completed touching crosshair. This has a floating dot in the center, which a lot of more precision shooters will enjoy, but it still has the thicker post at 3, 6, and 9, which will help draw your eyes to the center. But the illumination is absolutely the dimmest of the bunch. I've talked to Night Pearl about possibly putting in a fiber dot illuminated reticle on this, and they're going to see how the market fares with it. But I think it could absolutely benefit from it. The GLX is going to be our segue into the better, simpler reticles and much brighter red dot bright illumination. This is the Nova reticle, which was first introduced in the SLX a couple of years ago, then the PLXC, and this was somewhere in between. Rumor has it that the special purposes were a mistake by the manufacturer or by Primary Arms themselves, and instead of just throwing them away, they decided to label them as a special purpose Nova and sell them. And I love the Nova reticle. It's very, very simple, but the illumination on this one doesn't seem as bright as the SLX or the PLX. The PST Gen 2 is definitely old, but man, oh man, is the illumination still oh so sweet. The drops on this reticle aren't really doing a whole lot for a lot of people. Me personally, I would either prefer something like what the Nova has, which gives you a little bit more confidence as far as where your rough ideas of your BDCs should be, or just a simple crosshair where you can hold whatever zero you want and figure out your drops from there. Basically a battle zero if you so choose that. But the PST still holds its own extremely well. Not too dissimilar from the PST is the Tomahawk 2 as far as reticle design. The posts at 3, 6, and 9 are thicker but don't go as long. And as you can see, as we increase the magnification to its maximum, there is a significant amount of tunneling. And unfortunately, it's there, but you don't really notice it all that much. But it's still something that has to be talked about. The illumination on this blue version is too bright. It hurts your eyes on the brightest settings, even on a bright sunny day. They do offer it in different colors, but as far as the blue, it is insanely bright. Way too bright. I would actually call it dangerously bright. I'm not even joking with you folks. It hurts if you look at it for too long on too bright of a setting. Absolute overkill. But the king of simple and bright is going to be the Vector Continental. This very simple German number 4 reticle and the fiber dot illumination is almost every boy's dream. At least it is for me, because I'm a boy at heart, wishing I never grew up. But at least I get to play with guns, so that's always fun. You cannot get simpler than this, and you can't really get much brighter than this, with the exception of the Tomahawk 2. It is a wonderful combination. The only thing is there's only 6 brightness settings, so if you're really keen on getting the perfect brightness for your environment, you might have to look somewhere else. Before we move on to our next segment, I wanted to tell you that I'm not going to be bringing in every single reticle and scope option inside the $500 price point to talk about, because there is such a vast majority of different options out there that this video would be 6 hours long if I was to include every single one. Hopefully, though, you'll be able to figure out what you at least like with what you're trying to purchase for your next setup. In absolutely no particular order, we're going to be looking at these scopes in the garage, and I'm going to be telling you what it's like to actually get behind many of these scopes. The PST Gen 2 is one that I have very fond memories of the first time I got behind it. I really do feel it's 80 to 85% of what the Razer HD 1-6 is at less than half the price, basically a third of the price nowadays. And I mean, if you don't mind the slightly heavier weight of 22 or so ounces, this thing absolutely kicks butt. But it is on the higher side, in fact, the highest side of the price point that I wanted this video to hit. We will be talking on that more in depth, but getting behind this thing is a true experience. The illumination is outstanding. The reticle is more than good enough, I would say. The scope body is a little bit on the thicker side, but nothing obtruse or anything that's going to be getting in your way. The image is completely flat and distortion-free, and the image stability is as good as you could ever hope for. Overall, getting behind this thing and using it is a very good experience. The manual, on the other hand, has very poor illumination. A very simple reticle, which I am not opposed to in the slightest. But down here, due to its lack of bright illumination and the rather fine center crosshair, it does make for a much harder optic to use in a situation like this, where there's a lot of confusing things going on around your peripherals. So it's a little bit harder to pick up where the center is, especially given that that is the maximum brightness for the illumination. Another thing to keep in mind with this optic is that Night Pearl touts this as a hunting optic. So if you are in thick brush, this little fine center crosshair with very dim illumination might get lost on you rather quickly. With all that being said, the view through it is quite nice. It does look pretty good. It does have a little bit more scope body than I would personally care for, but again, like the PST Gen 2, it's not too intrusive. One thing I did note with this thing at 1x is that the image does have a fair amount of fisheye distortion to it. It's not terrible unless you're really looking for it or you're moving from one target to one target very quickly, then you will notice it. Other than that, the glass is very good, and the image stability on this is also quite high. Slotting itself between the SLX and the PLX-C, this special purpose GLX is dandy. It does have a little bit more distortion than I would personally like at 1x. Getting behind this does give you a little bit of fisheye, not as much as the manual, but definitely enough where you will notice it. However, that is the only real complaint I have with this thing. The view through it is a little bit on the smaller side, at least from what we've already seen. Absolutely average, to say the absolute least. The profile to the scope body itself is on the smaller side. The reticle is super easy to pick up. The illumination is more than bright enough, even though it's not as bright as many of the other fiber dot illuminated reticles we're going to be looking at throughout this video. And getting behind this thing has just been a real treat. Image stability is perfect, which is where the SLX Nova was lacking the most. Put your head behind this thing at any magnification, at any position, and you will be able to see through it perfectly clear. It's a wonderful balance of affordability and performance. I wish they still produce these things. I haven't gotten behind a Swamp Fox product in a while, but this Tomahawk 2 impressed me in a couple of ways. The illumination, as you can very clearly see, like I said earlier, is dangerously bright. It will hurt your eyes. Make no mistake about that. The view through it is rather large. The scope profile is a little bit on the smaller side, and its field of view is a little bit higher as a result of all of this. The reticle is also well scaled, so this way even if the illumination is off, you can still see those crosshairs at the center or on the outside quite easily. The image on this thing at 1x is pretty flat. It wasn't the best, but far and away from the worst. It was a pretty middle of the road. The only area where this thing really falls apart is as you go higher, it just gets a little bit harder to get behind it. And those in-between magnifications, you will see that you do have to shift your cheek well just a little bit to be able to look through it properly when you hit that shadow area in the 2 to 3x range. For a lot of people, that won't make a lick of difference because you're either on 1x or 6x. But for someone like myself, I really like those in-between magnifications. That's where I hang out most of the time. And this scope really does start to show its weaknesses when you're using the in-between magnifications. The Vector Continental has been a series and line of scopes that I have had nothing but success with. I think they are tremendous values for money, and the build quality absolutely feels well above the price point that they come in at. This 1 to 6 is no exception. It's got a wonderful looking view through it. It has good proportions for the scope body. It has a very wonderful options of reticles, but this is the only one that's going to come with fiber dot illumination. If you are looking for a more complicated BDC style reticle, they do offer a few different reticles that would probably tick all of your boxes. Some of them look really, really nice and interesting. I'd love to check them out one day. But for general purpose usability, this German number 4 is, it's sensational. Glass on this thing is very sharp and clear, very flat and true 1x. No real complaints with the exception of the exit pupil being a little bit on the small side. And that's going to ultimately play into how much I recommend this scope. And if you do really like this, I have a very easy solution for you that we will be talking about more in depth very soon. Venom. If the PST is 80% of the Razer HD 1 to 6, then the Venom, as far as view looking through it, size looking through it, and scope profile, is 90 to 95% the Razer HD Gen 2. This thing is flat out impressive to get behind. It is so impressive that it makes you wonder how expensive the scope really is. I've recently seen these things within the last week or so go on sale for under $250 with a mount, and it's such a tremendous value for money. 1X is almost perfectly flat. Big, beautiful view through it. When you get it just right as far as your eye relief, the scope body just disappears. Oh, it's excellent. Excellent, I say. Exit pupil is also quite good. Definitely average. Image stability is also perfect. The 6X does seem a little bit on the tighter side, but that's the only real complaint I have about this optic. There's nothing else in the optics department that I could really complain about. You do notice a little bit of lens flare coming off the back lens with the lighting in the background, but you'd have to be in really particular circumstances to actually notice that. And when you do, you could look past it fairly easily. The only hard part with that would be is if the sun's to your back, it might wash out the image a little bit. I had the Sig Tango MSR on a bolt action 22LR for a very long time. I even competed in a Appleseed event with it and performed very, very well, all things considered. I really liked the scope when I first reviewed it, and I still have a soft spot for it, but the view through it is much smaller than it seems to be right here. We'll take a look at that in some side-by-side comparisons soon. The illumination does get quite bright down here, but as you saw, it really reflects back on itself to the point where you can't really look past it. A quick adjustment of the illumination knob does rectify that. The reticle is serviceable. I had no real problems with it in a 22 realm, but if I was pushing this thing to 400, 500, 600 yards, I think it would still hold its own, given that the drops get quite narrow as you go up. But as far as your wind holds, it might be a little bit tricky to get that just right. Overall, it's not terrible, but there are better experiences to be had. And the last scope for this section is going to be the RT6. That reticle really does seem a little bit weak compared to everything else that we've looked at so far, in my opinion. The view through it is also on the smaller side, and the scope profile that we see is the largest of the bunch. The image on this at 1x is pretty good, but it's not a true 1x. There is a little bit of warping to the edge, and it's not as perfectly flat as I personally like. I do feel that this thing could be very easily improved if Burris so chose to do so, but I don't know if there's ever going to be a Gen 2 version of the RT6. Using it is okay. It's perfectly fine. It's serviceable. Again, it's not the best overall experience compared to some of the other scopes that we're looking at, especially for the price point. If you have one, would it be worth upgrading in the future? That's going to be for you to decide. But ultimately, there are better options to be had. I mean, there's nothing else to really say about this thing. I've talked about this thing a lot in multiple videos. In fact, I just recently made a video seeing if this thing is comparable and viable in today's market. And I ultimately said it's mostly okay. It's not terrible. But let's see how just okay it really is. For the Eyebox segment, we're going to start with the weakest performers to the best performers, and a couple in the middle are going to be literally just a roll of the dice. Unfortunately, we're starting out with the Vector Continental 1-6. Partly, I believe, because of the exit pupil on this thing. Vector claims 7.2 millimeters to 3.5 millimeters. And the biggest problem with that is that its bigger brother, the 1-8, also in second focal plane, is 8.5 to 3.0. So considerably larger than this. It's unfortunate, but it's just this is this thing's Achilles heel. It's quite tight to get behind. I should have mentioned that we're going to be starting off at 1x, 3x, and 6x for all the scopes moving forward. Optically, this thing performs quite well, but those shadows creep up awfully quick. As we start looking through the Tomahawk 2, I should also mention that all of these had brand new batteries, and all of them have their illumination on full. The 1x on this Tomahawk 2 is quite good. In fact, most of these 1-6s have a good 1x as far as the Eyebox goes. Some are better than others, but generally they're all going to be good. This is no exception until we start getting to the middle magnification. 2 to 3x is where we start getting the shadowing or the tunneling, and you can see it just doesn't seem to really fill itself in properly. It looks like it's missing something, and that's because it technically is. The 3x performance on this is almost like the 6x performance. It just sucks. It really sucks to get behind and really try to run. That is, so far, the biggest strike against the Tomahawk 2, in my opinion. The SIG Tango MSR just edges out the Tomahawk 2. At 1x, it's pretty good. Again, a little bit more distortion in some spots, but overall, more than easy enough to get behind. Even with the dimmer illumination from this reticle, it's still more than visible in these conditions, especially out in the shadows. 3x on this definitely performs a little bit better than the Tomahawk 2, and I would hope so. The view through the MSR is a little bit on the smaller side, and I wonder if they just designed that so this way the glass would be easier to get behind, and I believe it shows out pretty well. Now, SIG does claim a very wide field of view on the scope, and I'm not too sure if I believe that. As far as the Eyebox solely, though, this is not half bad, and this is starting to get to the point where we're going to have a bit of a blurring of the lines. And to showcase what I'm talking about, next is the RT6. This thing claims to have an 11.5 millimeter exit pupil at 1x, which is gigantic, and 5.2 millimeter at 6x. How true is that? I could measure that with a micrometer and a light, but I didn't. But getting behind it certainly seems quite refreshing. It's a little bit better than the MSR, not, I think, to what the standards are from Burris themselves as far as the exit pupil goes, but it handles itself quite well. There is some minor distortion at 1x, but above that, everything is nice, flat, and clear. And the 6x on this, as you can see, is very easy to navigate around. It's very linear as far as the shadow. It doesn't just instantly just shut off. Next up is the M6. The most expensive of the bunch finds itself in pretty high standings against everything else. Unfortunately, again, the illumination on this thing is not even visible, but very good looking image at 1x and a very forgiving Eyebox. Definitely on the up and up. 3X is also at least average. Again, we're splitting hairs at this point. Depends on the lights, depends on the eye. A lot of variables can change with this, but it's still quite easy to get behind. Again, the shadows don't seem to be too fast. They come in very progressively, and you can modulate where you are behind them fairly easily as a result. The 6X does seem to get a little bit tighter, and shadows do come up a little bit quick. A good cheek weld, though, should remedy any of these issues, but it's something to take note of. For the top 3, these things are splitting hairs. So one might look better in one area versus the other, and that's why they're all just sort of bunched here at the end, and I'm not going to crown one as a sole winner, because in my books, all 3 of these things are winners. We're going to start off with the Venom, which the 1X on this thing is so impressive to get behind. It's just such a wonderful experience for a scope so inexpensive. The 3X is average, slightly above average, but unfortunately the 6X is a little bit on the tighter side, but still definitely in the realm of usable, to the point where I don't think many people are going to have a real problem with it, especially if you have a good cheek weld. So far though, this thing performs really well in a couple of areas. The Eyebox is certainly one such example. The Special Purpose, or GLX, is one of, if not the most competent of all of these scopes when it comes to Eyebox. The 1X is very good. The 3X is good, and the 6X is also good. I feel it's got the proper progression going up from the minimum to the maximum magnification, where you can just expect it to perform a certain way. There's no hiccups along the road. It really is simple and elegant, and it works oh so well. And that's why it's here, second from the top, or at least tied for first place. 3-way tie. I think that's fair enough, because the Venom is just so impressive at 1X. And the last one we're going to look at is also the largest and the heaviest by a fair margin, the PST Gen 2. I don't need to really explain myself and why I feel that this is one of the best. You can see for yourself. The thing is gigantic at 1X. Sure, there might be a little bit of twisting to the image when we shift side to side, but at 3X, it's almost as big as some scopes are at 1X. It's insane. It's insanely good. And the 6X, again, basically on par with that. All of these scopes perform better than I was expecting, but there are 3 standouts: the Venom, the GLX, and the PST Gen 2. They are definitely the top 3 for this segment. Do I feel that any of these scopes would cause a problem when using it? If you have a really good cheek weld, I think you'll be okay. But if you're moving fast as far as transitioning from one target to the next and you're trying to look through the scope, the Continental and the Tomahawk are going to be a little tricky. Everything above that will be, again, slightly better and better and better. But if that's something that you're really sensitive to, I would definitely look at the top 3 from this comparison as closely as you can. For this section, I'm going to be doing these in a bracket form. So we're going to do 2 of them side by side for 4 rounds, and then progressively add on to see which one comes out probably as the best optically. Now, all 8 of these optics were filmed on the exact same day, within about an hour and a half or 2 hours of one another. Everything was set up as good as I possibly could get it. So every single one of these scopes, with the exception of the Vector Continental, which I messed up, and we'll talk about that more when we get there, but all of these are as good as I could possibly make them look. We're going to start this out with the Burris RT6 on the left and the Night Pearl Manual M6 on the right. There is a noticeable color palette difference between these two. The RT6 is much warmer, whereas the M6 is a little bit cooler, a little bit more monotone. Now, despite the fact that they were filmed fairly close to one another, the lighting did change. I tried to keep all the settings as close to the same as possible while keeping the same exposure values, so it would be as close to accurate as possible. This is not an exact science, it's more of an art, and unfortunately I'm not a very good artist, so I'm doing the best that I can. The RT6 on the left looks absolutely sensational at this 100-yard paper target, with the 180-yard berm behind it showing those steel plates very easily. The M6 still offers a very good looking image. Really can't complain too much on its sharpness or its clarity. Its color tone is a little bit different. I can't really say I know why, other than maybe they just designed it to be like that. All the other scopes that we are going to look at are going to be a little bit more on the warmer side, like the RT6. So with the M6, yeah, we'll just keep that in mind. As far as why am I pitting these two up against one another, well, they both have 6s in their names, so I figured that's a good enough starting point for me. View through these, the RT6 pulls ahead ever so slightly to the M6, but the M6 has a much smaller scope profile that we see looking through it, so gives and takes. The RT6 is also much older than the M6, so that definitely has something to do with it. But despite its age, optically it is still very impressive. Reticle-wise, I might as well touch on why not. I vastly prefer the M6 reticle over the RT6 reticle for most uses, especially if the illumination craps out. The RT6 reticle is definitely the hardest one to use in this entire lineup. For the $300 and something that you're going to be saving buying the RT6 over the M6, I have to say optically it performs better. I didn't even talk about paper specs. As far as the weight, the RT6 is about 1.5 ounces lighter. They're basically the same length at 10.3 inches. The field of view is actually quite close, but for whatever reason, the M6 at 6x is really, really shy. So 106 to 18.5 for the Burris and 109 to 10.8 for the M6. I don't know where those numbers really came from, but there you go. That's from their website. And the eye relief is just about the same, but the exit pupil absolutely goes to the RT6. So there are some very key differences here, but solely based on optical clarity, I have to give it to the RT6 in this case. Next up is the Sig Tango MSR on the left and the Vortex Venom on the right. Both of these are about the same price. The Venom is a little bit heavier, about 19.5 versus 18.5. I could not find the length of the Sig Tango MSR, and even though I owned this optic, I recently sold it, and I now can't measure it as a result. So hindsight's always 20/20. As far as their field of views, the Venom comes in at 126 to 20.2. The MSR is claiming 124 to 19.6. So really close to one another, but the view through the Venom is on the larger side compared to the MSR. It also gives you a much better sense that you're looking through the scope as opposed to looking at the scope. Both of them have, as near as makes no difference, the same eye relief at 3.7 and 3.8 inches respectively. Both of these reticles are so close to one another that you're basically just flipping the coin over which one you prefer. I think I still prefer the Venom's reticle ever so slightly over the MSR's. Optically, I think the MSR might have the Venom beaten a couple of areas. I think in max sharpness, the MSR might pull ahead slightly, but the Venom doesn't have what I would consider to be a bad image, at least at 100 yards. At the 180-yard berm behind it, it could go either which way. I think the MSR has slightly better contrast, but again, we're completely splitting hairs with these two side by side. I much prefer all of the controls of the Venom to the MSR, and I prefer its overall build quality. The MSR feels pretty good in hand, but there's some things about it that just don't fill you full of confidence, most notably being the turrets and the illumination control. Just, they could be better. Focusing on our 200-yard paper target, you could see a little bit of chromatic aberration popping up on the Venom at the top part of that white backer, but beyond that, they both look quite good. Despite the fact that the Venom's image looks a little bit darker, I would say that it has a little bit more contrast in that dead brush area, but it could just be my eye. Your eye might pick it up a little bit differently. I think the MSR is still a little bit sharper at the ultimate maximum, but as far as my time with both of these optics, I much prefer using the Venom. The Venom, as we saw earlier, performs extremely well up to about 5x and 6x. It still performs very good, but it's not at its peak. The MSR is a little bit better at 6x, but I much prefer the overall experience of using the Venom over the MSR. Both of them are still viable options. Which one is going to be for you is going to depend on many different factors. But between these two, optically, honestly, flip a coin. Yeah, the MSR might have a little bit better colors and less chromatic aberration in this instance, but the 1x performance goes to the Venom. Ultimately, though, are either of these bad? Absolutely not. I would say, if anything, these are both absolutely excellent when it comes to their overall performance. The MSR definitely has a slightly darker image as opposed to the Venom. I would say the Venom might have a slightly warmer image to the MSR being a little bit cooler. So it depends on if you're looking for a little bit more sharpness or a little bit more brightness. Either which way, they're both quite good. Because both of them have 2 in their names, we're going to have the Tomahawk 2 pitted up against the PST Gen 2. And boy howdy, does the Tomahawk have its work cut out for it. Because the PST Gen 2 optically has been a benchmark, in my opinion. And I don't know if the Tomahawk can keep up. So, price-wise, we've already talked about the differences. Weight-wise, the Tomahawk is actually only 2 ounces lighter at 20.6 versus 22.7. 10% still 10%, but is that enough to go with one versus the other, especially if the heavier one performs better in a couple areas? That's up to you. Length-wise, the Tomahawk is about a ½ inch shorter at 10.5 inches. Field of view, though, is actually quite interesting. Vortex claims 112.5 to 18.8 feet, whereas Swamp Fox claims 120 to 20.9 feet. Maybe? Sure. Okay. I'll give it a little bit, because focusing on the exact same target from the exact same position, sure, we could see a little bit to the left of the Tomahawk more than we can with the PST. But the view through the PST is a little bit larger. But more notably than that, because we're looking at image clarity and sharpness, the PST has a much sharper looking image edge to edge, whereas the Tomahawk definitely starts to have a little bit of blurring up at the 12 o'clock position. And it's not just at maximum magnification, it's from the middle of the magnification going all the way up. As we pan from maximum to minimum and now minimum back to maximum, you can notice the shadows creeping in on the Tomahawk 2, which I think is part of the reason why this thing isn't as sharp and clear as the PST. So definitely something to take into consideration. Another thing to take into consideration is that my setup is extremely rigid. So if you were to get behind the Tomahawk 2, if you're moving around the gun in different positions, you might not notice that tunneling effect as much. But if you're anal, like myself, it's going to be one of those things that's going to be a deal breaker for you. So, yeah. As far as how these two perform in various different areas, sure, the Tomahawk 2 has a couple of things that I feel are pretty solid. The reticle is pretty good. I mean, both these reticles are basically the exact same. The illumination brightness on the Tomahawk is better, but it's to the point where it's too bright. There's nothing wrong with the PST Gen 2 brightness at all. In fact, I would go as far as to say any brighter is almost doing you a disservice. Optically, it has to go to the PST. It's just a vastly superior looking optic, despite the fact that at the 200-yard targets on the PST at 6 o'clock, you do see a little bit of chromatic aberration, whereas with the Tomahawk 2, you do not. Happily, it's not so obtrusive that it's going to be taking your attention off of what you're trying to focus on at the center, but it's still something that I have to take note of. Some people actually prefer chromatic aberration because it helps define areas that, you know, have a high contrast. This way you can see things a little bit better. I know some German, or I should say some Eastern European manufacturers like to produce their glass with a lot of chromatic aberration for their intended uses in the forest out there. So once again, different strokes for different folks. I have to really apologize for all of you and to Vector for not confirming sharpness with the Continental. I was taking these from my recording rig to my rifle, playing around with them, confirming zeros, that sort of stuff, and I did tweak some of their rear diopters to make them look a little bit better to my eye. I try to get the focus 100% uniform with all of the optics. In fact, I do that very religiously. But every once in a while, I make a minor tweak. And I'm talking a tenth of a turn is all that's required to go from, wow, that's razor sharp, to, ooh, that's a little bit soft. It really is a very delicate balance. And I did not 100% square away and confirm that the Continental was as good as it needed to be to go up against the special purpose primary arms GLX. Because the GLX, I have to call it the GLX, is just wow. Wow, wow, wow. Really, really good looking. The Continental still looks quite good despite the fact that it can be tweaked a little bit better. But just imagine how much better the Continental would look if it was slightly tweaked a little bit better. So I sincerely apologize. The GLX and the Continental, other than just overall sharpness, look quite similar as far as colors and contrast go. I think the GLX has a little bit more contrast and a little bit more depth to the colors. But the Continental has much brighter illumination, simpler reticle, but I mean, both these reticles are, as near as makes no difference, about the same. View looking through them, the Continental wins by a small margin. The GLX is not the largest to look through, but definitely not the smallest. But I think it's a really good compromise for the overall balance that Primary Arms was able to strike with this particular optic. Here at 200 yards, both of these look quite good. The Continental is a little bit on the brighter side, but I adjust the camera to, again, bring that exposure value to be as close to 0 as possible, and both of these look really quite excellent. But again, the GLX has a little bit more contrast with all that dark, dead brush. Both of these, though, perform extremely well and very close to one another. It's a real shame that Primary Arms discontinued this thing, because this is an absolute sensational performance. I'm not going to get upset about it. I'm not going to cry about it. Focusing on our last target set at 300 yards, there's nothing we could really say that I haven't already said. The GLX performs basically flawlessly, and the Continental is unfortunately a little bit behind due to a folly on my behalf. If I had spent the time to confirm that the Continental was as good as possible, I would say these two are so close to one another. Again, we're splitting hairs. But for right now, it definitely goes to the GLX. The problem is, you can't buy those new. So the Continental sort of wins by default. And with that, let's get into the semifinals. I'm going to keep these much shorter because we already went in depth with all of them. First up is going to be the RT6 versus the Venom. I choose the Venom over the MSR because the Venom is just a better overall product. And despite the fact that I think the MSR might have the Venom edged out as overall sharpness go, I like everything else about the Venom image more. But the RT6 is still a better overall image, sharpness, clarities, colors. Distortion, I'm not talking about that, but the Venom does handle distortion better at 1x. Above 1x, none of these really have any sort of issues, so it really comes down to just the 1x performance across the board. If I was to crop the RT6 image to be the exact same size as the Venom's image, I bet you'd have a hard time picking these two apart. Sure, you could check that the berm is a slightly different shade of brown between these two, but other than that, it's like you're looking through the exact same optic. It's really impressive to see. Now, beyond just their optics, the Venom is 2 ounces heavier, going to be about the same price, going to be the exact same length. The Venom is going to have, on paper at least, a much larger field of view, and the exact same eye relief. Both of these, though, looking through them, you can clearly tell that the Venom is larger to look through. And again, it's going to have a much smaller scope profile than the RT6. Which one would I choose? Despite how good the RT6 is optically, I'm probably going to go for the Venom. But because this is an optical clarity test, ooh, it's splitting hairs. Rounding out the semifinals is going to be the PST Gen 2 and the Special Purpose GLX. Take note, ladies and gentlemen, that 3 of the top 4 finalists here are made in the Philippines. No, I do not think that is by coincidence. The PST Gen 2 has a larger view looking through it and a flatter looking 1X. The colors and brightness are a little bit different between these two. Definitely the GLX looks a little bit darker, the PST looks a little bit brighter, but the GLX looks like it has a little bit more contrast, whereas the PST looks like it's down ever so slightly. Reticles are very similar to one another. The PST does have brighter illumination over the GLX. Again, I think it was a folly. They were like a whoopsie scope by Primary Arms, so that might have something to do with it. But again, I still think the special purpose has more than bright enough illumination. PST is just, well, the PST. It's been the gold standard for a long time, and now you know why. Focusing on our 100-yard paper targets, is there much that we could really decipher between these two that would put them at odds with one another? No, they're both excellent. I cannot complain about either of these in the slightest. Both of these just look oh so good. I'm not even going to talk anymore. Just look at how good both of these are. Yeah, they speak for themselves. The absolute worst thing about these two going head to head is that the PST is almost going to win by default because the special purpose is not readily available. They do pop up on the used market every once in a while, but unfortunately that's few and far between. It's the only optic we're looking at intently here that isn't readily available to purchase brand new. It pains me to say that, but I'm doing this just to prove that some optics like that maybe should never have been discontinued. From a sheer raw optics standpoint, how good the images look, it's RT6 versus PST Gen 2. These two, to my eye, are as good as you could possibly get these images to look from 1 to 6 second focal plane in this price bracket. Both of them are made in the Philippines. Both of them, while very old, perform exceptionally well here at this 300-yard range. I really can't fault either of these optically. Yeah, the fisheye on the RT6 is a little more apparent than I would like. The PST is basically perfectly flat. The RT6 still performs optically better than most. Now, how much better? Hopefully, after this last 25-minute section, you can see that despite the fact that the RT6 and the PST Gen 2 definitely outperform much of the competition, it's by a very narrow margin. It's not like, oh my God, this is a huge difference. All of them perform really good compared to one another. It's just that the RT6 and the PSG Gen 2 perform that little bit extra. But is that little bit extra of one area really going to make you go from wanting to buy that scope to buying something else? I don't think so. But I really wanted to showcase how good some of these optics are optically, despite the fact that they are a little bit on the older side and a little bit on the heavier side. And it's really funny to me that 3 of the top 4 finishers were made in the Philippines. Makes you wonder why more scopes aren't made in the Philippines. Anyway, between these two, optically, total crapshoot. Flip a coin and go with it. As far as which one is the better overall experience, well, we're going to close on that right now because it's time to try to wrap this up and keep this video under an hour, which I don't think is actually going to be possible. So it's time for me to try to put this video into context and pick some sort of order between worst to best, at least for me, and I cannot stress that enough. You might like other scopes for other reasons, but I'm going to run down the pros and cons and which ones I feel are the worst-ish to the best-ish. It's not a dedicated list. Basically, the first 4 are going to be really close to one another, and the last 4 are going to be really close to one another. So don't take this as law. Don't take this as gospel. It's just from my personal experiences with using them and playing around with them and comparing them side by side. It's just what I've experienced. So with all that being said, I'm going to start out talking about the Swamp Fox Tomahawk 2. Swamp Fox definitely tried making changes to their norm when it comes to their overall architecture and look and feel of their optics, and I kind of like what they're trying to do with the Tomahawk 2, but it just falls short performance-wise. Yes, the illumination is insanely bright, but one good characteristic doesn't make the rest of it good, or at least it doesn't pick up the rest of it. It's way too bright, but that's fine. It's still very, very good. The controls are pretty good. The elevation turret being exposed, at least it's locking, not my cup of tea, especially keep in mind it's also a little bit on the taller side, so if you want to run an offset red dot at 12 o'clock, you have to take that into consideration. Color tones are a little bit warmer, but there is some shift to the image, so when we're looking at a target and we bring the scope up into our field of view, at 1x, the image will shift. Most of these scopes have that. I'll be talking about that as we go. It's not so bad with this that you can't train around it, but it is something that you will notice. The biggest thing for me with this optic was the Eyebox. The image really falls apart between 2 and 3x, and all the way up to 6x, it just doesn't fill me full of confidence. Is it usable? Absolutely. But is it comparable to a lot of the rest of the field that we're looking at? Not quite. It definitely is one of the weakest performing optics overall as a package, but you could probably get these on sale for a really, really cheap price. And given the fact that it's got the daylight bright illumination, it's got some pretty nice controls, it's got some good features, and Swamp Fox has a really strong following. I mean, I like a lot of their optics. This one I feel just misses the mark ever so slightly. And that is why it is down here towards the bottom. Next up is the Sig Tango MSR. This was on my CZ457 Royal 16-inch for a very long time as my trainer setup for my Ruger American Ranch, and it was a very good overall package. And I successfully got multiple rifleman patches from an Appleseed event with that combination. It's a capable optic. Some of the controls are pretty good. The turrets are really abysmal. The illumination is whack. And but the reticle is okay. So the reticle makes up for a lot of the shortcomings with the illumination brightness. Optically, as we saw earlier, this thing looks really, really good. It's capable of producing a very sharp, clear image. But the overall experience behind it is not as great as many of the newer competition. It's as simple as that. The shift through the image on this thing is a little bit more apparent than what we've already talked about with the Tomahawk 2. It's definitely above the average, which in this case is not a good thing. The biggest issue with this optic for me, though, is how bad the image starts to fall apart the higher up magnification you go. The image stability is nowhere near where it needs to be the best. Beyond that, it's not bad overall. You can get these for really cheap. I think I paid with the mount for this thing well under $300 a few years ago. And for that price, it's really hard to argue. But there are a lot of other scopes that we're going to be talking about right now that also fall in that price point. Next up is the Burris RT6. I recently did a video where I talk about this thing and see if it's still a viable option, and I think it's still pretty good. And that's basically what I'm going to reiterate right now. It's pretty good. It's got tremendous image sharpness, clarity, and contrast, as we've already took a look at very in depth. And in that regard, it's extremely capable. Where it's not really capable is with its image stability and its overall just end user experience. The controls are a bit on the weaker side. The amount of scope body we see is really big, and the reticle is very weak, as is the illumination. The image stability is okay, and we do have a fairly significant shift to the image when we're looking at a target and we bring the scope into our line of sight. And don't even get me started about the fisheye effect at 1x. It is by far and away the most apparent, to my eye anyway, of the bunch. All of those things add up to being okay. You know, it tries to balance itself out, but the good things about it aren't good enough to make the meh things about it good enough to make the whole entire thing really good. It's acceptable. The pepper mount really is hot garbage, especially in comparison to the offerings from SIG and Vortex. And for the price point, you can get a much more compelling package. Last up for the bottom four is going to be the Night Pearl Manual M6. The main reason why this is here is it's the most expensive by a very large margin. The illumination is the weakest. And, well, that's really it. Those two things definitely add up to create some turmoil. If this thing was $500, it would be square in line with the PST Gen 2. And I still don't think that it's a fair comparison to put this up against the PST Gen 2. So for the fact that this is $130 more expensive than that is largely why it's so far down. Beyond that, the controls on this thing are incredibly nice. All of the Night Pearl products that I have gotten my hands on recently have tremendous controls. So good, in fact, that it reminds me a lot of the higher-end Meopta stuff, which makes sense because Night Pearl has hired a lot of former Meopta employees to make their products better. There is massive potential with this product. Optically, this thing actually punches above its weight class, I would say. Yes, head-to-head with all of the other LPVOs we've looked at, there's still some stiff competition, but there's some real charm behind getting behind this optic. The reticle I really like, even though it's a bit on the finer side towards the center. I would like to see those posts increased thickness a little bit. And of course, fiber dot illumination would really bring this into the realm of, okay, justifiably expensive. These are designed in the Czech Republic. These are made in China, as are most of the other optics, with the exception of the special purpose GLX, the RT6, and the PST Gen 2. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but there you have it. This thing has massive potential, but it's two big things, its price and its illumination performance, really cut it short. And it's a real buzzkill. I had originally thought this thing was under $400 when I started including it in this comparison, and I had that mindset for a while because I just didn't double check the price. So it's my bad. So it's kind of out of the original price point I was trying to achieve with this video. But I'm kind of glad that I brought it along for the ride to see how it compares with lesser expensive options. Overall, physically, this thing is exquisite. Optically, it's very good. It's got a very stable image. It's got very good color representation. It's got a lot of the great things that you'd like to see. But it could still use a little bit of tweaking. I'm hoping that Night Pearl will take some of my criticisms and start working on a Gen 2 to really help segue them into the American market, because this has massive potential. So finally, into the top four, we're going to start with the Vortex Venom. These are in no way, shape, or form labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are basically all tied for first place. Every single one of these optics brings something more than one thing to the table that is desirable. The Vortex Venom, for the price point that these things have been coming in at, is an absolute charmer of an optic. Getting behind this thing quickly really reminds me of a Gen 2 Razor HD 1-6. And for the $260 that you could find this with a mount for as recently as last week, mid-May, is insane to me. It's so insane. It's insane. It's as simple as that. Sure, the illumination isn't on par with the best of the best, but it's still more than bright enough, and the reticle is designed easily enough so that you could use it in most environments without requiring illumination, which is really, really nice. It won't be for everybody. If you're like me, you'd still prefer a simple crosshair German number 4, but if you're okay with that, then that's the only area of the Venom that I could say is maybe on the weaker side. It's reticle. And even then, it's perfectly fine and suitable as long as it's okay for you. I would happily run this LPVO on any rifle I was planning on using, whether it was a fun plinker for the range or something I'm going to run into the ground at 2-gun competitions. I think it is a tremendous overall package. And I'm really impressed by how this thing has performed. The only other area I could really say I felt this thing fell a little bit short with is the eyebox and the exit pupil at the higher magnification. When I was filming this, it was actually later on in the evening, so the sun was starting to go down. My eyes were starting to dilate, so that was going to change how I was perceiving looking through the optic compared to the rest of everything. But it still is a lot tighter, and it seems to have the shadows creep up a little bit faster in this environment. But the trade-off for that is you have a giant view looking through it with a disappearing scope body. I think if Vortex tried to balance the view through it with the scope profile and the eyebox a little bit better, it would be an even better package. But regardless to that, getting behind this thing at any magnification, as long as it's bright enough, is a real treat. The 1X on this thing is also very true to form. It's very flat and very clear. It's really something to appreciate. The primary arm's special purpose Nova, basically a GLX in sheep's clothing, is the most disappointing of the bunch because it's not readily available anymore. I love a lot of what this scope has to bring to the table. Its controls, its fit and finish, it feels like an incredibly very well-made optic, and that's because it is. And when these things were available at $400, I would have said this versus the PST Gen 2, ooh, splitting hairs, folks. You could save weight, a little bit of length by going with this, and you could have saved money with this as opposed to the PST Gen 2. Both are made in the Philippines. Both feel exceptionally good in hand. And I mean, the PST Gen 2's track record speaks for itself. The one I have has battle scars all over it from being used and abused for years and years and years, and it just keeps on ticking. But this special purpose, the only thing that wasn't 100% with me is just the 1X felt a little shifty. The image shifts a little bit more than I would like, meaning getting on target, pulling the scope up into view, everything would shift down a little bit. Absolutely trainable. You could train around that, but you will notice that if you're looking for it. Beyond that, it's nearly flawless. It is way better to my eye than the SLX Nova simply because the image stability on this thing is tremendous. It's basically as good as you can get. Sure, the Eyebox might get a little bit tighter in the higher magnifications, but the reticle and the target at any magnification will remain super sharp to themselves, and you won't have any shifting of the reticle on target. Whereas with the SLX, from 2X to 5X, that thing fell apart. At 1X and 6X, it was super impressive, and at 1X, it did have a very nice, big, large view looking through it, and a fairly small scope body. But I would have happily spent the extra money to get one of these over the SLX. It's really sad to say that I don't know if Primary Arms will ever be producing these optics again, because it's such a treat. The Vector Continental 1-6 is another optic that has a lot going for it. Does it need a throw lever? Sure it does. And the one that, unfortunately, Vector produces, it could use some modifications. I'm already talking to them about how they could change it. Will they? Who knows? I really hope they do, though, because it would make their lives a lot easier. Beyond that, these things feel easily as good as the Night Pearl manual, which is several $100s more expensive than this. Illumination on this thing is insane. Reticle is insane. If you don't like the reticle, you can buy this with a multitude of different reticles. They won't have fiber dot illumination, but at least you can get different reticle options for this. It's one of the only few optics that we're looking at that you can get in this price point that will offer different reticles, which is really, really cool. But this is the one I would personally buy and actually recommend, because sometimes the acronym KISS, Keep It Simple Stupid, really plays into real life at every turn. There's nothing I could really say negatively about this scope except The Eyebox was nowhere near as forgiving as I was hoping and expecting it would be. And the only reason why I could say that is not only because I compared this against 7 other 1-6s of similar magnification ranges and whatnot, but this thing's bigger brother, the 1-8 ED, has, I feel, a slightly better Eyebox than this. And it's a 1-8. And it's got the same reticle and the same illumination and basically the same body, a little bit longer. But that thing's not that much more money than this. I think it's still sub $400. And the Eyebox is at least the same as this, if not better. And the image quality on the 1-8 was staggeringly good, breathtakingly good. Go watch my review on that, and you'll see for yourself. It's actually my favorite second focal plane 1-8 on the market. And I was expecting this to be a little bit better than that because it's lower magnification. And that's usually how it goes. But not this case. I really wanted this thing to be better than the 1-8, but I don't think it is. So would I recommend this? I'd actually recommend the 1-8. Go buy that, spend a little bit more money, still very affordable, and then you're getting 2 more X on top of the 1-6, and you're getting everything else being the same. That's it. The 1X is perfectly flat. The image is very clear and sharp. There's very little shift when looking through it. There's nothing to really say about this thing negatively other than the fact the 1-8 is better with the Eyebox. And easily even keel with everything else with this optic. So buy this or the 1-8. Yeah, buy the 1-8. The PST Gen 2 needs no introduction. I've talked about this thing a lot in recent years, and for good reason. It's a benchmark. For the sub $500 1-6 second focal plane LPVO, it has been the one to get for many, many reasons. I've always said this thing's 75 to 80% a Gen 2 Razor HD as far as overall performance-wise, and I might even argue it's a little bit higher than that, but it always costs less than half the price. Even more so now, I feel the Gen 2 Razor HDs are $1,400-$1,500 in most cases. So that makes this about a third the price of a Gen 2 Razor HD. And I don't think it's a third the optic. Not at all. This thing has been used and abused, and it's definitely got some wear and tear on it. The illumination knob does have a little bit of play, but it still works perfectly fine. Another nice thing about this is if you were to get one, Vortex has one of the best warranties in the business. Most of the other companies that we've looked at, or all the other scopes from different brands that we've talked about, have good warranties on paper. As far as how they'll actually be to use, I can't really say for sure. Burris is not known for having the best. SIG is weird when it comes to electronics, so if your illumination craps out, they might not fix it. There's just a lot of questionable things going on with that. Whereas with Vortex, you very rarely have to worry about anything. But some people feel that because their warranty is so good, their products usually break easily. So take that for what it's worth. I haven't really experienced that for the most part, at least not with the PST Gen 2. The only thing I could say that is a negative is the weight. At over 22 ounces, it is considerably heavier than everything else by a decent margin, at least 10%. But some people would associate weight with durability or weight with build quality. And with this scope, at least, I will agree with that. The materials feel a little bit thicker. It feels much chunkier in hand. It feels more substantial than a lot of other optics. And given how well this thing performs in every other aspect, I will happily deal with a slight weight penalty to not have to worry about this thing ever giving me a hard time. Now, is the reticle the best out there? No, but at least those hash marks that they have on the windage and elevation drops will give you a bit of an idea of where to aim at distance if you had to make a shot and hold over. Even if you could just call your miss, you could easily have a place point where you could then hold that over your target to hopefully make a hit. Not the best, it's not a Nova reticle, but it's far and away from the worst. The illumination also continues to be one of the strongest performers here, and optically, this thing is just so impressive. There is a slight shift at 1x, but ever so slight. And it makes no difference because the image through this thing is so big and so flat and so clear and so sharp, and the image is so stable that I don't care about the shift because it's so good in every other aspect. But you have to be willing to, number one, pay the extra price for it, because even if you find this thing for $500, it's still going to be $150 to $200 more expensive than a lot of other optics we've looked at, and then you still have to worry about the weight. But again, I cannot stress this enough. Those 3 to 4 ounces off an average weight 1 to 6 LPVO to this, sometimes I don't think that really matters.
So it's been a few months since I started this whole entire process, and I finished filming, probably about a couple months ago. It took a long time for me to get this together because there's a lot of information I'm trying to judge through, a lot of different videos that I'm trying to edit together and have make sense. But I'm pretty confident what I'm about to say is as good as I could possibly feel about the scopes that we've already taken a look at. The biggest disappointment for me is actually this, the primary arms special purpose. And the reason for that is it's discontinued. This would probably be my number one pick. For $400, the size, the weight, the performance, the capacity, the controls, everything about this thing would really have it close to the top as far as if I had to choose one out of the entire bunch. Putting it side by side with the PST Gen 2, you can see it's about an inch or so shorter. It's a few ounces lighter. It comes with an excellent throw lever included, which is basically modeled off the PLXC. And its overall fit, finish, and all the controls are just wonderful. I'm so happy to have this in my collection, but I'd be even happier if they were readily available. If you want to find one of these used, or if you can find one of these used and you really want to get into this segment, buy one of these used. Even at $300, it's worth the investment. But because it's sort of out there in no man's land, we can't really talk about it that much more. The Vector Continental is another slight disappointment, only because the 1 to 8 is better. This is small. Well, it's actually not that small. It's the longest of the bunch. It's longer than the PST Gen 2. And that's part of the reason why I thought this thing optically would be incredible, just like the 1 to 8. The 1 to 8 is even longer than this, but despite the fact it has 2 extra X on the top end, optically, I think it's superior to this. And Eyebox-wise, it's at least as good as this, if not better. I really do feel it's better. And I think the exit pupil is bigger on the 1 to 8 than it is on this, the 1 to 6. If this was slightly better than the 1 to 8, then this would be the one I would highly recommend. Vector's just been knocking it out of the park. A lot of their scopes are tremendous. And for the low to mid 300s that you can buy these for, wow, it's such a compelling argument. I really wish that this was better than the 1 to 8. But unfortunately, the 1 to 8 is better. So I don't recommend this. I recommend the 1 to 8. So buy the 1 to 8 Vector Continental if you're looking for the best possible experience. So that has to put this off to the side. Now we're left with the 2 Vortex products. A lot of the other scopes that we've looked at, the other 4, I'm not really going to talk about because as good as most of those are, I feel that these really start to come to a peak. And at the top of that peak, we have some of the best products. Going to talk about the PST Gen 2 probably next. As far as an overall package, this thing is flawless with the exception of the very heavy weight. I would happily sacrifice the weight penalty for the overall performance, but a lot of you aren't going to be able to accept that, especially for the fact that these are still the most expensive with the exception of the Night Pearl in this test. It's definitely on the higher end price point wise, but I do feel you're getting a more substantial product. This is probably still the 1 to 6 I would recommend despite its minor shortcomings, but those shortcomings are so minor, you shouldn't even consider them being a problem unless you're really weight sensitive or you're just looking to have something different. Now, the scope I would probably recommend to most people of the bunch is the Venom. And the reason for this is that you could find these with a mount typically for under $300. And this is a lot of scope for the money. Sure, it doesn't have true daytime bright illumination. Sure, it's got a slightly quirky reticle, but some of you are going to love the fact that it's got this reticle. Others aren't so much. But for the size, the weight, the price point, the controls, the way this thing feels to use is really, really awesome. It's very impressive. It might not have the sharpest glass compared to everything, but the view through this, the sense of wow you're going to get when you first get yourself behind this is going to be worth it alone for that. And that's all I really have to say about it. It's very impressive, but more so because this thing is so inexpensive. Just recently, I saw these on sale with a mount for sub $250. I don't know if there's a better 1-6 on the market for that price point. I mean, it's so inexpensive, and the Vortex mounts that come with them are really nice. So if you need a cantilever mount, granted, I think they're only 1.5 inch high, but if you need it, you get it for a really, really, really cheap price. So to conclude this in 30 seconds, the PST Gen 2, if you don't mind its age or its weight. The Venom, if you're looking for one of the least expensive options, possibly with a mount. And the Continental 1-8, if you're looking for something that's going to, well, feel like it's in a class of its own. And with that, a huge thank you for all of the individuals that lent me their 1-6 second focal plane LPVOs for this mega comparison. I had them for a very long time, and I'm sorry for all of them. But most importantly, a huge thank you to all of you. I hope this video has helped you at least understand the realm that is fairly low budget second focal plane 1-6 LPVOs. And hopefully, with a little bit of luck, this video will help you on your next purchase. So this way, you're not going in blind. So with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. And as always, I'll see you again next time.
And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.